Hello, I'm John McNamara, and I'd like to talk today about the role of Archbishop Vigano in the McCarrick Report. On August 22nd, 2018, Archbishop Vigano, who was the former papal nuncio to the United States, issued a statement, and he attacked many of the bishops of the United States and also Pope Francis, actually calling upon Pope Francis to resign for their role in the handling of the allegations with regard to Cardinal McCarrick. This was kind of unusual and very embarrassing that someone who had that position in the United States would attack some of the bishops of the United States and then, of course, attack the Pope. The Pope was asked about this on his way home from a papal trip to Ireland, and he just really issued a no comment. Didn't want to get in, back and forth with Archbishop Vigano at that time. But the bishops of the United States and Pope Francis agreed that it would be good to investigate this matter further, and the result of that investigation was the quite extensive, over 400 pages, McCarrick Report. And this report really details a lot of the allegations, a lot of the things that happened, and there are some previous videos where I spoke about that. But today I'd like to really just concentrate on the role of Archbishop Vigano. And so the McCarrick Report was issued on November 10th, 2020, so it took about 2 years of a very thorough investigation to look at some of Vigano's claims. Now Vigano's statement that he issued on August 22nd of 2018, claimed that his memoranda that he wrote, and he wrote two of them, one in 2006 and one in 2008, were never returned to him with any actual decision by superiors in this matter. And so he kind of implied in that statement that, they were kind of not really taking me seriously when I issued my memoranda, calling their attention to Cardinal McCarrick. The information, though, was actually communicated to Cardinal Ray, who headed the dicastery with competence in this matter, and he was overseeing the dicastery that would deal with the bishops and cardinals and those who had issues. He would be the one who was responsible for that, so it was communicated to him. Vigano claimed in his statement that he asked his superiors to intervene as soon as possible and to make sure that McCarrick would be subjected to the sanctions of the Code of Canon Law. Actually, Vigano stated in his memorandum of 2008 that sanctions would only be appropriate if the allegations were true and proven. So you really couldn't put sanctions on someone unless the allegations were, first of all, true allegations and that there was some proof to back them up, and that a procedure to determine these allegations, since it referenced a cardinal, that procedure would only come upon instructions from the Pope. So actually, the different bishops and cardinals who are involved in the Vatican would not have the final say on that. That would, of course, come from the Pope. Vigano also claimed that two of the previous nuncios who were assigned in the United States, Nuncio Montalvo and Nuncio Sambi, did not fail to inform the Holy See immediately as soon as they learned of Archbishop McCarrick's gravely immoral behavior with seminarians and priests. And actually, when you look at the situation, neither Montalvo or Sambi claimed to have found clear evidence that McCarrick had engaged in any immoral conduct with either seminarians or priests. So certain allegations were brought to their attention, and they didn't see anything convincing at that time in those allegations. And at that point, no seminarians had come forward and no priest who was deemed credible had come forward with any allegations. So, of course, there were a lot of rumors and possibilities, but nothing that was definitive at that point. Montalvo claimed that the allegations were not definitively proven. And Sambi wrote that the rector and others at the Redemptorist Mater Seminary, where McCarrick lived at that time, were convinced that any immoral behavior was, in his words, unthinkable. So neither of them said anything definitive about McCarrick at that point. Samby, also in his report in May of 2008, did not present any definitive evidence at all of McCarrick's sexual misconduct with others. So at this point, there were, as we said, rumors, but there was nothing really definitive. Vigano claimed that his 2008 memorandum was also never returned to the personnel office. He was upset that there was no measure taken against the cardinal and that there was no communication with him directly. He was unaware, though, that his superiors had acted on it and that it was brought actually all the way up to the Pope. There was nothing unusual that the matter was not brought back to Vigano, since he was a subordinate and he had no final authority to make any decision. Cardinal Ray did take certain steps in June of 2008, and not, as Vigano wrote in his memorandum, in 2009 or 2010. So that 2008 memorandum, it was acted upon immediately by Cardinal Ray. Cardinal Ray wrote to the nuncio at that time, who was Nuncio Samby, and he also wrote to Cardinal McCarrick on June 14th of 2008, and stated that McCarrick should live in a religious house with other people, and that he should not travel in the United States or abroad. This letter was not juridical in nature. There was an expectation that McCarrick would comply, since it came from the Holy See. The stronger approach was not taken because at this time there was no credible accusation of sexual misconduct. So because nothing had surfaced at that point that was credible, that was the action that was deemed appropriate. He was in retirement at that time, and they thought that if he restricted his activities a bit and he lived in a house of prayer, a religious house, that would be sufficient to kind of curb anything that could occur. The contents of this letter were communicated by Cardinal Ray to the Pope at that time, Pope Benedict XVI, and Pope Benedict agreed with that approach. He said that's a good approach to take in this matter. Cardinal Ray also communicated with Cardinal Petrone, who was the Secretary of State at the time, and he wanted to make him aware that McCarrick should really not be traveling to Rome or involved in meetings at Rome at that time. Cardinal Ray also sent a copy of that letter to Cardinal Levada, who was the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. This information would not have been shared even with senior officials because it involved a cardinal. And so they would keep the privacy of the cardinal and respect that, and communicated to these other cardinals. They were the ones really they felt who needed to know this information, that a certain action was being taken against McCarrick to kind of restrict him in terms of travel, in terms of other meetings, and to restrict him in terms of where he lived, so that there could be no other possibility of any problems with regard to the cardinal. Now, Vigano claimed in his letter that Pope Benedict XVI had imposed sanctions on McCarrick. There were no formal sanctions. McCarrick remained free to travel with the permission of the nuncio and the Holy See. So what McCarrick would frequently do is he would mention certain meetings to the nuncio or someone in the Holy See, and they would have to get approval for that travel from them. He would do it in agreement with them. Contrary to Vigano's statement, Cardinal Olouet, who was the prefect of the Congregation of the Bishops at that time, he succeeded Cardinal Ray. He never discussed a ban on public ministry or any other canonical sanctions with him, as they were never imposed. So there was no need to discuss those particular sanctions. They hadn't been imposed. He could travel on a limited basis, so there was no need to really talk about any particular other penalties. Vigano mentioned in his statement that he repeated the restrictions to Cardinal McCarrick when he arrived in Washington, D.C. as the new papal nuncio. So he succeeded Nuncio Sambi, and he was in Washington, D.C. McCarrick has stated, though, that there was no such meeting and that there are no notes or letters that reference such a meeting. McCarrick continued his travels after Vigano's arrival, and he would always consult with Vigano about those travels, inform him as to where he was going and the different meetings that he would be involved with. It would be unusual that there would be no written record by Vigano about this particular meeting because Vigano, as we've seen, liked to write memorandums and kind of keep things well documented. So the fact that there was no written record of that meeting, and McCarrick has denied it, seems kind of a little bit unusual. In his subsequent letters to Cardinal Olivet about McCarrick, Vigano did not refer to any prior meetings during which restrictions were discussed. So again, you would have thought that he would have mentioned to the Cardinal as he was communicating to him about McCarrick that, I met with him and I told him that this is what should happen, and there doesn't seem to be any reference to any such meeting or any such communication between Vigano and McCarrick in those letters that he wrote to Olivet. And Nuncio Vigano was a host or a participant at some of the public meetings that McCarrick attended, and he warmly referred to him at the World Mission Dinner of the Pontifical Mission Societies in the United States, which was held at a Manhattan hotel in May of 2012. So at this occasion, he referred to McCarrick in rather warm terms, expressed his admiration for the work that he had done to help the missions. And was aware that McCarrick was involved in that work. McCarrick kept Vigano informed of these activities, as he had done the same with Sambi and Montalvo before that. Vigano's decision to take no action during the first 6 months of 2012 in response to the detailed reports he had received about McCarrick's travel is inconsistent with the claim that the Cardinal was subject to canonical sanctions that were imposed on him by Pope Benedict XVI that prohibited him from travel and required him to dedicate himself to a life of prayer and penance. So it would seem odd that here McCarrick is traveling and Vigano is aware of the traveling, and at the same time he's saying, well, Pope Benedict said that he couldn't travel, that he must just be restricted to a life of prayer and penance. Well, Vigano knew about it, but took no action with regard to it, didn't say, well, this is what McCarrick is doing. So again, it seems like a little bit of a strange contradiction there. Now the situation changed in August 12th of 2012. There was a priest who's referred to in the report as Priest 3, and again, they are given numbers to maintain their anonymity, informed Nuncio Vigano of a lawsuit alleging overt sexual contact between him and McCarrick in 1991. So here, this report comes. It's 21 years old, but it comes to the attention of Nuncio Vigano because the priest wrote directly to him. Vigano then wrote to Cardinal Olivet on August 13th, the very next day of 2012, informing him about this. So there was an urgency to it. He wrote to Cardinal Olivet right away. Olivet then responded, and he instructed Vigano to take certain steps, including an inquiry with certain diocesan officials, and also an inquiry with Priest 3 to determine if these allegations were credible. So Olivet said, well, we've got some allegations here. Are they true? Are they false? Well, follow up on it, and he gave Vigano those instructions. Follow up on it with the diocese where the priest is coming from, so you can check it out there with the officials that are there, and also to look into it with the priest himself, Priest 3, to have an interview with him, to talk to him, and get all the details from him. In a statement in 2018, Vigano did not mention his exchange of letters in 2012 and 2013 with Cardinal Olivet. So that seems to be left out. Vigano did not take the steps that were outlined to him by Cardinal Olivet, and therefore there was never a determination of the credibility of these allegations. which were never obtained by the nunciature or by the Holy See, since Vigano did not pursue them. This remains a bit of a mystery. Cardinal Olivet clearly in his letter instructed him to do this. He did not do it, did not have the interview with Priest 3, and that kind of made Priest 3 seem like, I wrote to him, why isn't he communicating with me and having a conversation and at least exploring it with me? So that seemed to be a little bit odd. The action that he did take is he telephoned the bishop, Bishop Bataski, and Bishop Bataski informed him that Priest 3 was neither credible nor reliable. So basically the bishop said, don't worry about it. This fellow is, not really credible. I don't think it's serious. Don't pursue it, and kind of left it there. There is no record that Vigano relayed this assessment at that time to Cardinal Olivet, which is strange. You would have thought, Cardinal Olivet asked him to pursue this. You thought, again, there would have been a communication back to the cardinal saying, I did have this conversation with Bishop Bataski. This is what he said. Again, there was no conversation with Priest 3 or any conversation with anybody else from the diocese who might have been involved in this allegation. It seemed that it was just Bishop Bataski, and that was it. On May 20th, then, 2013, Bishop Bataski wrote to Vigano and informed him that the civil case of Priest 3 was dismissed. Vigano then informed Cardinal Olivet about this in a letter on June 13th, 2013. So again, there seems to be a gap here. When the allegation came forward, there was kind of an immediate response, but here there seems to be a little bit delayed. Based on the incomplete information received from Vigano, Cardinal Olivet saw no need to raise any issue with regard to McCarrick with Pope Francis. So this was never brought to Pope Francis. Pope Francis didn't know about this Priest 3. It never got to him because Cardinal Olivet said, well, the case was dismissed. Vigano doesn't seem to be pursuing it. I guess there's really nothing there. Vigano wrote in his statement of 2018 that from the time of Pope Francis's election, McCarrick felt that all of the restraints on his travel, his giving interviews, his lecturing, were removed. Vigano, though, failed to mention that he was well aware himself that McCarrick was engaging in activities well before the election of Pope Francis. It was not like Pope Francis came and then McCarrick felt, oh, I can do whatever I want. No, he had been doing these things, giving interviews and traveling with the knowledge of the nuncios and the officials in the Vatican. There were some restrictions on him, but it wasn't, that you couldn't travel at all. And so this was strange to say that, well, now Pope Francis is allowing this when Pope Francis really had nothing to do with it. It was established earlier by Pope Benedict and by Cardinal Ray, and it had just kind of carried on in that way. Vigano had personally participated in many of these activities without raising an objection. And Vigano had referred to Cardinal Ray's written instructions as a dead letter because it seemed like a lot of these travels that he did were approved and were okay. So it wasn't that it was going to be strictly enforced. It was kind of giving Cardinal McCarrick some parameters and trying to limit him somewhat, but not that intensely and strictly enforced. Vigano did not mention in his correspondence with those three dicasteries in the Vatican that McCarrick's travel had been long-standing and had received the approval of Nuncio Sambi, who had a conversation with him and said, well, you can do some traveling, but, keep it low-key. Vigano did not mention that McCarrick had offered to go into a more retirement mode in his June 2012 letter to Vigano, and that there was no encouragement from Vigano to follow this path. So McCarrick had made that offer, well, maybe at this point I should go into more of a retirement mode, do less traveling. And Vigano didn't say, oh, absolutely, you've got to do that. That's really what you should do. And he was aware of the travels of McCarrick. In conclusion, we might say that the statement that Archbishop Vigano released publicly on August 22nd, 2018, was filled with inaccuracies with regard to the McCarrick situation. Vigano attacked many church officials in his statement, but really does not acknowledge his own failure to follow the clear instructions of Cardinal Olivet. And perhaps if he had followed those instructions and done a more thorough investigation at that point in 2012, there might have been a different outcome. So again, there was a failure really to investigate. And it is strange in many ways that Archbishop Vigano seems to be pointing the finger at other bishops and Pope Francis and not taking responsibility himself for his own role in the situation and his own failure really to investigate when a serious matter was brought to his attention.